Commander stood in the observation chamber of Stellar Station Zeta-7, looking down at the training grounds below. His forearms crossed in a gesture of calm authority, his scaled blue skin catching the light from the viewport. He had commanded the military academy for 300 years. 300 years of training the finest warriors from across the galaxy. 300 years of watching species learn discipline, strategy, and the proper way to wage war. His assistant, a young with crystalline skin, approached with a data tablet, took it without turning from the viewport. "The human has arrived, Commander," the assistant said, voice thin and careful. Read the information displayed on the tablet. One human, female, name Captain Sarah, age 32 years, military experience, 3 planetary conflicts, current rank captain in the Earth Defense Force. He almost laughed. Humans were not warriors, everyone knew this. They were soft creatures from a planet with heavy gravity but weak bodies. They had no natural armor, no enhanced senses, no built-in weapons like they had their armor plating or they had their twin pulses of lethal energy in each fist. Humans were curious things, sure. They had decent enough technology now. They had joined the galactic community only 70 years ago and they had been polite about it. But warriors. The very word seemed wrong when applied to creatures so fragile. The Council had decided that humanity needed to be assessed properly. Some said it was good diplomacy to include humans in the academy. Some said it was research, did not care about the politics. He saw it as a waste of time. "Assign her to basic combat fundamentals," said, handing the tablet back. "And schedule her with Instructor for the foundational exercises, the ones we give to the youngest cadets." "Yes, Commander," the assistant said and left. Returned to watching the training grounds. A group of warriors were practicing hand-to-hand combat against training drones. They moved with perfect precision, each motion flowing into the next. Their size and strength made them natural fighters. The galaxy's greatest civilizations had warriors at their core for good reason. Humans would not last long here, a few weeks maybe. Then they would break, ask to go home, and the Council would get their assessment. Humans are not suited for military training. Problem solved. An hour later, received notification that Captain Sarah had arrived in the Academy's main concourse. Against his usual routine, he decided to watch her arrival directly rather than through reports. The concourse was large and filled with students moving between training areas, stood on an elevated platform observing. When Sarah walked in, she immediately stood out, not because she was small, though she was. The around her towered 3 times her height, but because she moved like someone who had learned to watch everything at once. Her eyes took in the space, the exits, the other students, the exits again. Her shoulders stayed loose, ready, her hands stayed visible. These were not the movements of a tourist visiting a new place. These were the movements of a soldier in enemy territory. She wore the Earth Defense uniform, simple gray and black with medals on her chest. 3 planets, 3 wars. The medals meant she had survived when others had not. Found himself descending from his platform. Captain Sarah saw him coming and straightened. She recognized the rank insignia on his uniform. "Commander, I'm Captain Sarah. Thank you for allowing me to train here." Her voice was steady. No fear, no excitement, just calm acknowledgement of the situation. His first instinct was to feel respect. His second was to dismiss it. Respect for humans was not necessary. "Welcome, Captain," he said. "You have been assigned to basic foundational training. You will begin with the physical conditioning program designed for all new students. It is quite simple. I do not think you will find it challenging." He said this last part deliberately, to remind her and himself that she did not belong here. Sarah did not flinch. "I understand, Commander. When do we start?" "Tomorrow, first light. Instructor will meet you at the training grounds." "I'll be ready," Sarah said. Nodded and walked away. He did not expect to hear that name again after a few weeks. The human would break. They always broke eventually. That night did something he rarely did. He accessed the full military records of Captain Sarah. He told himself it was administrative thoroughness, nothing more. Her first conflict was on a colony world called 442b. It had been attacked by an unknown species. Sarah had been a junior officer then. During the retreat, she had stayed behind with her unit to hold a passage so others could escape. She had been listed as killed in action. But she was not dead. She had been captured, spent 9 months in an alien prison, and then escaped. She had walked 200 kilometers through hostile terrain to reach the evacuation point. The medical reports said she had been broken twice, burned, and was missing several teeth when she arrived. She requested to return to active duty after 6 weeks of recovery. The second conflict was against raiders from the outer systems. Sarah had been part of a special operations team. They had been sent to sabotage a weapons facility. The mission went wrong. The team was ambushed. Of 12 soldiers, only 2 returned. Sarah and one other. She had carried her wounded partner for 5 kilometers while being pursued by armed enemies. The third conflict was more recent. A full invasion of human territory by the Or Empire. It had lasted almost 2 years. Sarah had been promoted to captain. She had led a strike team against Or command center. The mission had been called suicide. She had completed it. 23 enemy combatants killed. Her team had lost 3 people. She had carried one of their bodies back personally. Closed the files. A human who had been broken and chose to continue fighting. A human who had been ambushed and chosen to save her companions. A human who had walked into what everyone called a suicide mission and walked out alive. "They're all like this," said aloud to the empty room. "Every single one." He had read hundreds of human military records in the years since Earth joined the galaxy. They were all that the first week of training was designed to break down ego and teach basic discipline. Sarah arrived before dawn at the training grounds, standing alone while instructors and other cadets made their way to their assigned areas. Watched from above, expecting her to struggle. The physical conditioning course came first. Cadets had to run 20 kilometers while carrying weighted vests designed for their species. For the vest weighed 500 kilograms. For smaller species, it was less. For Sarah, instructor assigned her a vest that weighed 200 kilograms. It was meant to be manageable but challenging. Sarah put it on without complaint. She ran the course in 2 hours and 30 minutes. The youngest cadets finished in similar times. Sarah was not fast. She was not strong compared to the others, but she finished. Noted this, it was expected. What was not expected was what came next. The obstacle course was designed to test adaptability and problem-solving. Cadets had to climb walls 20 meters high, jump across gaps that required upper body strength and timing, and crawl through passages too narrow for some species. Sarah watched as other cadets completed it in various ways. Some used pure strength. Some used their multiple arms for balance. Some used natural climbing abilities. When Sarah's turn came, she moved differently. She watched the gaps carefully, calculating angles. When she reached the climbing wall, she did not attack it with force. She used her lower body strength to push herself up while her hands found holds that barely existed. She took her time. Her approach was deliberate. She slipped twice. Both times, she caught herself with her hands and arms, letting her body absorb the impact instead of trying to use force. The second fall left her hanging from the edge with one hand for several seconds. Her shoulder shook, but she pulled herself back up and continued. An older instructor named watched her with growing curiosity. "Why does she go so slowly?" he asked. "Because she has no choice," replied. "She lacks the strength and speed of other cadets." "No," said. "She chooses to go slowly. She is calculating each movement. Most cadets rely on instinct or physical power. She uses her mind instead." Did not respond, but he watched Sarah more carefully after that. The hand-to-hand combat training began on the 3rd day. Instructor taught the basic fighting forms, which were designed to maximize damage using multiple limbs and leverage points. Sarah had only 2 arms. This was a significant disadvantage. Demonstrated a hold that required 2 arms to set up and 2 arms to maintain control. "This move is fundamental," said. "The attacker uses their strength to control the opponent's movement. All combat grows from this principle." Sarah practiced with a training partner, a young with 4 arms. When she tried to execute the hold, the escaped easily. Not because the was skilled, but because Sarah's 2 arms could not match 4. But then Sarah asked a question that heard over the Academy communication system. "Instructor, what happens if I use the opponent's own momentum against them, instead of trying to match their strength?" Paused. "The forms are designed for a specific approach, Captain. You should follow them as taught." "Yes, instructor," Sarah said, but in her next practice round she did something different. When the move to attack, Sarah shifted her weight and redirected their force. The stumbled. It was not a perfect technique. It was rough and unpolished, but it worked. Walked over to her. The entire training floor went quiet. Students did not experiment with the forms. The forms were law. "Show me that again," commanded. Sarah repeated the movement. This time saw the principle. Instead of meeting force with force, Sarah was using angles and timing to minimize the strength advantage. "That is not how we fight," said. "No, Instructor," Sarah agreed. "It is how humans fight. We are weaker, so we fight differently." Turned away. Sarah did not know if she had offended him or impressed him. She returned to training and did not ask another question. But saw stop and think about what Sarah had shown him. That was significant. By the end of the first week, the pattern became clear. Sarah was not the strongest, fastest, or most naturally talented cadet in the academy, but she asked questions that other cadets did not. She tried approaches that violated standard procedure. She adapted when her body could not match the demands placed on her. The low-gravity flight simulator was scheduled for the second week. This was where expected to see her fail completely. The simulator was a three-dimensional combat arena where cadets had to navigate while wearing flight gear that mimicked zero gravity. Most species with flight capability dominated this exercise. They had wings. They had natural flight instinct from an evolutionary past. They could adjust their crystal structure to shift weight and momentum. Humans had never flown. They had no instinct for it. Sarah put on the flight gear and entered the simulator, watched from the control booth as she floated into the arena. Her movements were clumsy at first. She flailed. She misjudged distances. She crashed into virtual walls twice in the first minute. But then something changed. Sarah stopped trying to fly. Instead, she started using angles and trajectories. She pushed off walls to create momentum. She used her arms to slow her rotation. She moved through the three-dimensional space like she was solving a mathematics problem instead of trying to do something her body was not designed for. An instructor named X raised his eyebrows. "She is thinking in vectors," he said. "She is calculating physics instead of feeling her way through the space." When the simulation spawned virtual enemies, most cadets tried to turn and face them or use their natural flight advantages. Sarah did something different. When an enemy approached, she did not run or hide. She used the limited space between obstacles to control the fight. She put walls and support structures between herself and the enemy. She forced the combat into 2 dimensions instead of 3. She did not win. She was hit by virtual fire twice, but she lasted longer than expected. And in the final seconds, she executed a maneuver where she crashed into an obstacle deliberately, absorbed the impact without being eliminated, and used her momentum to crash into the virtual enemy fighter. It was not graceful, it was not elegant, it was barely legal under the rules, but it worked. The simulation ended. Sarah floated in the arena, breathing hard, her heart probably racing from adrenaline. She removed the flight gear and stepped out of the simulator. Turned to X. "She is not improving enough to matter. She will still fail advanced training." "Perhaps," X said carefully. "But I have trained warriors for 50 years, Commander. That human just did something I have never seen before. She did not try to become what she was not. She became better at being what she is." Did not argue, but he made a note in his personal log. It said only 2 words: "Keep watching." 3 weeks into her training, Sarah was assigned to her first formal combat match. The entire academy would be watching. The instructors would be watching. The other cadets would see how a human performed against real alien warriors. The opponent chosen for her was Hen, a young warrior. Hen was 8 years into his academy training. He stood 10 feet tall. His body was covered in natural armor plating the color of burnished bronze. His strength was 4 times that of a human. His reflexes were enhanced by evolution for combat. Hen was chosen specifically because he represented what everyone expected. Sarah would lose. She would lose badly. The academy would get their answer. The human experiment would end. Order would be restored. Sat in the observation deck with the other instructors. The sparring arena below was cleared. Medical personnel stood ready with healing equipment. The rules were simple but brutal. Matches ended when one fighter yielded, lost consciousness, or could no longer continue. Serious injuries were expected. Death was possible but discouraged. Sarah entered the arena wearing basic combat gear. Her body was small next to the sparring platform. Her armor was thin compared to what they wore. She looked out of place. Hen entered from the opposite side. He moved with the confidence of someone who had won dozens of matches. He nodded to the referee. This was procedure, a simple gesture of respect between warriors. Hen was not worried. The referee raised his hand and dropped it. The match began. Hen attacked with overwhelming force. He moved fast enough that most observers would have only seen a blur. He threw a punch that would have torn through a concrete wall. Sarah did not try to block it. She moved to the side and let it pass within inches of her head. The audience went silent. Hen recovered instantly and threw a second punch. Sarah moved again, then a third attack. Sarah moved. This was not defense through blocking. This was defense through pure movement and positioning. Hen growled in frustration. Attack and defense were not usually this simple. He pressed forward, throwing combinations instead of single blows. Multiple strikes from different angles, all designed to catch her no matter which way she moved. Sarah stopped moving backward. Instead, she moved forward and to the side, getting inside Hen's guard. This was the space that his armor was designed to protect. But the armor had gaps. There were places where the plating ended to allow movement, the joints where his limbs connected to his body, the spaces under his shoulders. Hen tried to crush her in close combat, where his size advantage was maximum. He reached around her with his massive arms. Sarah twisted her body and used his own reach against him. She gripped his extended arm and pulled his shoulder forward, using his momentum to put him off balance. The crowd reacted, some in shock, some in anger, some in confusion. What they were seeing violated the normal rules of combat. Hen was stronger. He should be winning. Instead, he was being redirected by a small human woman who moved like water, never opposing his force directly, always flowing around it. Sarah pushed into Hen's space, not trying to match his strength, but instead controlling the angle of his body. She swept his leg while turning her shoulder into his chest. Hen stumbled. For the first time, he lost his balance. He fell forward. Sarah guided his fall rather than resisting it, using the momentum to increase the force. Hen crashed to the ground hard enough to crack the sparring platform. The sound echoed through the arena. The spectators erupted in confusion. Some cheered, some booed, most simply stared in disbelief. Hen was down, but he was not beaten. His armor plating protected him from the worst of the impact. He rolled and pushed himself up. His face showed anger now, real anger. He came at Sarah again, but his attacks were less calculated and more desperate. He was trying to hit her instead of controlling the fight. This was a mistake. It played directly into her approach. Sarah used his own attacks against him, redirecting his force, putting his weight in directions his body did not expect to go. She was not trying to defeat him through power. She was trying to teach him something about positioning and leverage. The match lasted 14 minutes. By the end, both fighters were exhausted. But Hen had been thrown to the ground twice more. His breathing was heavy, his movements were slower. Sarah pressed in for what looked like a final attack. Instead of striking Hen, she grabbed his sword arm above the elbow and his torso and executed a hold that locked his arm at a dangerous angle. One more pull, one more application of force, and his arm would break. Sarah held the position steady. Her muscles shaking from effort, she waited. Hen's face twisted in pain. He was strong enough to resist for a few more seconds, but the angle was impossible. Fighting would only result in broken bone. "I yield," Hen said, his voice tight with pain. Sarah released him immediately. She stepped back and bowed. It was a small gesture, but it showed respect. She was not celebrating his defeat. She was acknowledging that they had both fought hard. The observation deck was silent. Did not move, he did not speak. He simply watched as Sarah helped Hen to his feet. The young was confused, ashamed, angry, but he accepted her help and walked off the arena. Leaned over too, she fought without anger, without pride. She was solving a problem. "Yes," said simply. "Hen has defeated warriors 3 times her size." "Yes," said again. Was watching the replay of the fight on a screen. She knew every move 3 steps before she made it. This is not luck. This is understanding. Stood and left the observation deck without explaining where he was going. He walked through the academy corridors until he reached the medical wing. Sarah was there, being checked for injuries. A young healer was examining her shoulder. "You dislocated it once," the healer said. "It has not healed completely. Fighting like that was dangerous." "It is fine," Sarah said. "Is Hen being treated?" "His arm is badly bruised. It will heal in a few days. You were fortunate you released him when you did." Sarah nodded and left the medical wing. She came face to face within the corridor. "Captain," she said, straightening, "I hope the match met your expectations." "It did not," said truthfully. It exceeded them. You fought differently than I expected. I fought the way humans must fight, Sarah said. We cannot match strength, we cannot match speed in most cases, so we use what we have, understanding and adaptation. Was quiet for a moment. You could have broken his arm. I saw the moment where you had the advantage. I could have, Sarah agreed, but there was no need. He had already yielded. Mercy in combat is unusual among my people, said. Among mine as well, Sarah replied. But I am the ambassador here. If I break a warrior's arm to win a match, it sends a message. If I win without causing permanent damage, it sends a different message. Considered this, what message is that? Sarah smiled slightly. That humans are not monsters, that we can be strong without being cruel. Found himself nodding. I need to review the Academy's combat teaching methods. P3 days after her match with Hen, Sarah received a message. Commander wanted to meet with her in his private office. She cleaned up after training and made her way to the administrative sector of the Academy. The office was large, with one entire wall looking out over the training grounds below. Was standing at the window when she entered. Sit, Captain, he said, not turning from the view. I want to discuss your background. Sarah sat in the chair across from his desk. What would you like to know? Everything, said. He turned from the window and faced her. Start with Earth, where you grew up, why you became a soldier. Sarah took a breath. She had given versions of this story before, but something about the way asked made her think he actually wanted to understand. Earth is a hard world, Sarah began. It is not like many of the planets in the galactic community. It has extreme weather, storms that can destroy cities, earthquakes, tsunamis. The gravity is heavy, which means everything requires more effort. Food was not always available. We competed for resources, and we were not alone. What do you mean not alone? Asked. Predators, large animals that hunted smaller ones. Early humans were hunted. We had to learn to hunt in return, to work together, to create tools and strategies. We had to become dangerous even though we had no natural weapons like your people. No armor, no enhanced strength, no multiple arms. Sarah paused. We learned to compensate. Sat down and activated a data panel on his desk. Tell me about your specific conflicts. Sarah talked. She talked about the colony on 442B, about being a young officer making bad decisions and living with those mistakes. She talked about being captured and imprisoned, about the cell that was too small to stand up in, about being tortured by or until they got bored with her. She talked about the moment she decided that broken bones and pain were better than staying a prisoner, and about the 200-kilometer walk to safety through hostile territory. Listened without interrupting. She talked about the second conflict, about the ambush, about watching her friends die while she could not save them, about the weight of a wounded soldier across her shoulders for 5 kilometers, about arriving at the evacuation point with her companion barely alive and finding out he did not survive 3 hours later despite all the medical technology available. His expression did not change, but his eyes were focused on every word. She talked about the invasion, about watching or Empire systematically conquer human territory, about the suicide mission to destroy their command center, about the moment the explosives went off and the entire structure started collapsing, about having to choose between saving her team and completing the mission. What did you choose? Asked. Both, Sarah said quietly. We completed the mission and I got most of my team out, lost 3. I would have lost all of them if I had stopped to grieve them in that moment, so I did not grieve them, I moved. I got the survivors to safety. Later I grieved. Stood and walked to the viewport. He looked down at the training grounds below. You know, Captain, I have trained warriors for 300 years. I have trained and dozens of other species. All of them evolved for combat. All of them have biological advantages. All of them come from military traditions. He turned back to face her. And I have never met a warrior like you. Sarah did not know how to respond. I accessed your complete military record this week, continued. Every mission, every evaluation, every medical report. I read accounts from alien officers who served with you. A general named wrote something that caught my attention. Activated his data panel and read aloud. Fighting alongside humans changed my understanding of courage. I had always believed courage was the absence of fear, the natural confidence of a warrior who knows their own strength. But humans are different. You fight even when you are terrified. You continue even when you are broken. You choose to move forward even when stopping would be easier and more rational. That is not courage without fear. That is courage because of fear. It is something my people have never developed. Looked at Sarah. Is that accurate? You fight because you are afraid. No, Sarah said. I fight despite being afraid. Fear is normal. Fear is the body saying that something is dangerous. In combat, everything is dangerous. The question is not whether you are afraid. The question is whether you act anyway. In 300 years, I have trained warriors who were born strong, said. But I have never trained a warrior who became strong. You were born weak, Captain. You chose to become strong. Sarah felt something shift in the room. This was not mockery. This was genuine observation. Continued, I was wrong about humanity. I believed you were soft creatures from a peaceful world. But Earth is not peaceful. Earth is a war. It has always been a war. Your entire species evolved on a world that tried to kill you. Every human who survives to adulthood has already won more battles than most galactic warriors ever face. He walked closer to her. The question I need to ask you is this. Is what you have done something unique to you, or can other humans do the same thing? Sarah considered this carefully. I am not special among my people, Commander. I am trained and experienced, but any human can learn what I have learned. Any human can fight with strategy instead of strength. Any human can continue after being broken. It is not a gift I have that others do not. It is a choice that my people learn to make. Sat down again, suddenly looking older than his 300 years. I have made a grave error in judgment, not just about you, about your entire species. How so? Sarah asked. I assessed humanity based on physical capabilities, said. I saw weakness and concluded inferiority, but strength and weakness are not the same as superiority and inferiority. A warrior who cannot match strength must develop other abilities. You were never weak, Captain. You were simply forced to develop in a different direction. He leaned back in his chair. I need you to help me understand something. On Earth, when children grow up, do they all face this kind of hardship? Do they all learn to continue after being broken? Most of us, Sarah said. Not all, but many. We learn early that the world is not kind, that comfort is temporary, that sometimes you must do hard things or you do not survive. Process this. And now humanity is part of the galactic community. You are surrounded by peace and stability and relative security. Do you think humans will lose this capacity? Will you become soft like we assumed you were? Some will, Sarah said. The young ones who have never had to fight for survival might not develop the same capabilities, but there will always be humans who understand that peace can end, that security is temporary, that tomorrow brings unknown challenges, and those humans will teach the others. Nodded slowly, he reached across his desk and activated a communication channel. X, I want you to begin developing a human combat philosophy curriculum. Captain Sarah will assist. We will offer it as an optional course for all students. If humans fight differently, the galaxy should learn those different methods. He turned off the channel and looked back at Sarah. You came here to prove something, did you not? I came here to try, Sarah said. I did not know if I would succeed. You have succeeded, said. And you have taught me that I knew far less about combat, warriors, and strength than I believed I did. That is worth more than any curriculum we could develop. She showed Al the same principle of controlled movement and leverage that had allowed her to overcome a much larger opponent. Al was skeptical. That was built for dominance, and the idea of anything else seemed impossible. But when the simulation started, Sarah called out instructions. Do not try to match their strength. Feel where their weight is going and guide it. Make them work against themselves. Al fought both enemies using what Sarah had taught. His technique was clumsy compared to what Sarah had shown. But the principle worked. When one enemy tried to overpower him, he redirected that force toward the other enemy. When they tried to crush him in a group, he moved to create space. The match lasted 8 minutes. Al did not win, but he lasted far longer than should have been possible, and more importantly, he began to understand something fundamental. Raw strength was not everything. The third scenario was the most challenging. A team of 3 cadets had to survive in a scenario where they were vastly outnumbered, and the environment was actively hostile. This was essentially a no-win situation. The goal was not to achieve victory, but to learn how to function when victory was impossible. 2 of the cadets were humans. They approached the problem differently than any of the alien warriors would have. Instead of trying to fight, they focused on survival. They took positions where they could defend each other. They chose not to engage enemies they could not defeat. They retreated strategically. They accepted small losses to prevent large ones. By the end of the scenario, all 3 cadets were still alive. They had not won, but they had done something the alien warriors had not considered. They had adapted their definition of success. Instead of fighting to defeat every enemy, they fought to survive as long as possible. "This is important," Sarah told the group. "Sometimes victory is not possible. Sometimes the goal is not to win, but to endure. Humans understand this better than most species because we evolved on a world that never gave us the luxury of guaranteed victory." As the training continued through the day, the lesson became more and more clear. Sarah was not teaching the cadets how to be stronger. She was teaching them how to think like people who could not rely on strength, how to use their minds as weapons, how to turn disadvantages into strategies. One cadet named N approached during a break. "Commander, I have always believed that combat was about domination, that the strongest warrior always won. But this human is teaching us that strength is not enough. How have we not learned this in all our years of training?" Consider the question carefully. Because we never had to, we evolved with strength as an advantage. We never developed the need to think beyond it. Humans were forced to think beyond their limitations, and now they are teaching us that thinking matters more than strength ever did. By the end of the advanced training session, something had shifted in the observation deck. The instructors were not watching with the expectation that they would see a human fail. They were watching with genuine curiosity about what methods Sarah would teach next. Hen, who had lost to her in combat, was one of the most attentive students. Sarah had shown him that his size and strength were not invincible, and instead of making him feel weak, it had made him feel free. For the first time in his life, he was learning to fight in ways that did not rely on his natural advantages. When the training session ended, several cadets approached Sarah and asked if she would continue teaching them. They wanted to understand this human approach to combat more deeply. "I will speak to Commander," Sarah said. "If he permits it, I would be honored to establish a regular course." That night, sat in his quarters and began to write his official report to the Galactic Council. This was the assessment they had requested when they sent Sarah to the academy. They had wanted to know if humans were suitable for military training. He wrote clearly and concisely about Sarah's performance. She had completed all required training. She had excelled in combat, not through brute strength, but through tactical thinking and adaptability. She had earned the respect of other cadets and instructors. Her understanding of leverage and positioning had allowed her to defeat opponents who outmatched her in every physical measure. But then went beyond the basic assessment. He wrote about what he had learned about humanity. He detailed the history of human evolution on a hostile world. He explained that what made humans dangerous was not any individual physical capability, but rather their collective determination to survive against odds that should have destroyed them. He wrote, "The fundamental misconception about humans is that they are less evolved for combat. The truth is more complex. Humans are more evolved for combat in ways that transcend physical attributes. They have learned to turn desperation into strength. They have learned to think their way through problems that cannot be solved by force. They have learned to continue after being broken, to adapt after failing, and to keep fighting even when victory seems impossible." Continued writing. "I recommend that the Academy establish a permanent human warfare program. We should invite additional human military specialists to teach advanced combat philosophy. The knowledge that humans can share about fighting without relying on natural physical advantages will benefit every warrior in our civilization." He paused, then added a personal note. "For 300 years, I believed I understood combat and warriors. I believed I could assess capability based on physical measures. Captain Sarah has taught me that I was wrong. She has shown me that true strength is not about what you are born with, but about what you choose to become. This is a lesson that the entire galaxy would benefit from learning." Reviewed the report one final time. It was honest. It was humble. It was a complete reversal of every assumption he had held about humans when Sarah had first arrived. He sent it to the council. The next morning, Sarah was called to office again. She stood at attention, wondering if she had violated some protocol. "At ease," said. "I have forwarded your assessment to the council. I have recommended that you be awarded full graduation status with honors. I have also recommended that we establish a human warfare studies program and that you remain here as an instructor." Sarah felt her eyes widen slightly. "Commander, I am honored, but I should report to my commanders on Earth." "I am aware," said, But the galaxy needs what you can teach, and I need you here to help me rebuild our entire approach to combat training. Will you consider it?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I will need to contact my command, but I am interested." "Good," said, "because I have already begun the paperwork." After Sarah left, stood at his viewport again, looking down at the training grounds. He saw cadets of various species working together. He saw humans training alongside aliens. He saw methods being taught that combined human adaptability with alien physical capabilities. Everything he had believed about military training was changing. Everything he had believed about human capability was changing. For 300 years, he had been certain about so many things. It had taken one human woman walking into his academy to show him that his certainty was built on a false foundation. Was grateful for that, because being wrong about something so fundamental meant there was so much more to learn. And learning, he realized, was what separated warriors from teachers. Warriors won battles, but teachers changed the future. Sarah had come to prove something. She had done that. But more importantly, she had opened a door. And through that door, the galaxy was beginning to see what humanity truly was. Not a species to be managed or assessed, but a species that had turned a hostile world into a training ground for the strongest warriors the galaxy had ever seen. And now, finally, everyone was starting to understand. Sarah was dismissed after that, but as she left his office, she heard say one more thing. "Send me the names of any other humans who might be qualified for advanced training. I want to know more about what your species can teach us." In that moment, Sarah understood that something fundamental had changed. The galaxy's view of humanity was about to shift, not because humans had conquered anyone or claimed territory, but because a single human woman had chosen to walk into the academy and show them what they could become when they refused to accept weakness as an excuse to stop trying. "We have been incomplete in our instruction. I am ready to learn, Commander, in any direction you think necessary." After she left, stood alone in the corridor. Everything he had believed about human potential, about the limits of what a small, weak species could accomplish, was being systematically demolished. And he was starting to wonder if his certainty about anything had ever been justified at all. By the end of the first week, Sarah had not excelled. She had not outperformed the other cadets. But she had not quit. She had not failed. She had simply continued, adapting and learning, doing whatever it took to keep moving forward. Found this fact harder to dismiss than he wanted to admit. Me, not the best soldiers in the galaxy, but the most persistent, the most willing to suffer, the most capable of continuing when any reasonable being would have stopped. Still, that meant nothing. Persistence and desperation were not the same as training. Sarah would still break. They all did eventually. The academy was designed to break warriors and rebuild them stronger. Sarah would not survive that process. Was certain of this, he had to be. But as he fell asleep that night, he found himself thinking about a woman who had walked 200 kilometers on a broken leg just to reach safety. A woman who had run toward danger instead of away from it. He wondered, for the first time in 300 years, if his certainty about anything might be wrong.